So again, I'm really great pleasure to introduce you to Chethan Kamath. He's a first-year postdoc fellow, originally from India, but he got his PhD in Vienna in the Institute of Science and Technology. Now doing his postdoc studying cryptography in Tel Aviv University. And he will speak to us about total puzzles and cryptography, which is a fascinating story. I'll just tell you that this morning we had so much trouble, people getting into Zoom because of all that cryptography, and but maybe Chethan can help us. You're muted. Chethan, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thanks a lot for the introduction, Ariad. So I will talk about total puzzles and cryptography. And so this is my topic of research. I will spend the majority of the time explaining to you what total puzzles are and what we do in cryptography. And in the end, I will talk about my research where I study the relationship between these two objects. So, consider the task you do hundreds of times every day, sending an SMS or a message over WhatsApp. So here, Bob sends a smiley to Alice on the right. So in cryptography, what we do is we make sure that this basic task is carried out in a secure manner. So what do we mean by this? So what are the things that can go wrong? So one thing that we all are very aware of these days is that of privacy. So we want to make sure that no one in the middle can listen to what we are talking about. The way we would do this is using digital analogs of lockers, of vaults. So you put the message in a vault and then send it over to the other person. Digital analogs of these vaults. Another aspect of the communication is that of integrity. So you want to make sure that the message sent by one person to another is not tampered in between, right? So you send a smiley, but when it reaches the other point, it becomes a frown. So what we need for this is a digital analog of wax seals. So in the olden days, what we used to do is we used to put letters in wax seals so that it cannot be tampered with in transit. And finally, there is a question of identity. So Alice receives a message from Bob, and it's claimed it's from Bob. But how can she ensure that it is actually from Bob and not from someone else who is impersonating to be Bob? For this, we have in the physical world we have signatures. In the digital world we have analogs of signatures called digital signatures. So these are broadly the questions that come under the umbrella of cryptography. So I just talked about like sending an SMS or an email, but this question applied. These things apply to everything you do in your normal life. For example, when you use a rough cuff, or when you log onto a website, or even when you do a bank transaction, that these things are running under the hood to make that things are secure. So I talked a lot about these digital analogs of a locker, of a wax seal, of a signature. So the next question is, how do you actually build these objects? For this, we rely on mathematical puzzles. So for concreteness, you can think of like a jigsaw puzzle. So you're given a puzzle, which is the pieces which are scrambled, and the solution to this puzzle is the final assembled piece. And what we do is we formally show using mathematical theorems that if, for example, someone wants to break into your communication, then he needs to solve a puzzle, a hard puzzle. That's how we formally establish security of the communication. And so, since we don't want to put all the eggs in one basket, it is ideal to use as many puzzles as possible. So what you have seen is we build crypto on top of puzzles. So what are the types of puzzles that we need to build cryptography? So the first thing is to consider like some easy puzzle, for example, sorting. So it turns out that this is not very helpful because we want the task to be hard. Sorting is easy. Anyone can sort things without a lot of time. So let's take something which is hard, for example, chess. So in chess, you are given a position as a puzzle, and the solution to this puzzle is to decide whether white wins or black wins. It turns out we don't know how to do cryptography from chess because it's not hard to check the solution to a chess puzzle. So what about Sudoku? Here we know how to check a solution to the puzzle. We can just check if every row and every column and every subbox has 1 to 9. But again, we don't know how to do cryptography from Sudoku because we don't know how to generate hard instances with the solution. So that brings us to what is used these days to build cryptography. There is something called factoring. So if in factoring, you are given a huge number, and your task is to split it into two smaller numbers. And most of our cryptography these days is built on this problem. So I should say, yeah, you are split it into two parts, and when you multiply them, you should get the bigger number. This is the puzzle you have. So as I said, it's prudent to base cryptography on as many puzzles as possible. So one of the puzzles is factoring. And so factoring is a special type of a puzzle. It's a puzzle where you are guaranteed that the puzzle has a solution. So you might think, isn't it the case that doesn't every puzzle have a solution? It's not exactly true. So you can have like Sudoku instances where when it doesn't have a solution, and it's not easy to tell whether this is true or not. Therefore, so what we do is we work with puzzles that have a solution. So use an analogy, we use haystacks where it's guaranteed that the haystack has a needle. And so there are many interesting problems that are of this type that are total. We call such puzzles total. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of other domains which rely on these problems. For example, there are many problems in game theory or economics which can be framed as total puzzles. So these are certain problems in economics, they always have a solution, but the question is whether we can find them. So I have hopefully explained to you what we do as cryptographers and what total puzzles are. So that brings us to my research. I try to understand, I try to study the relationship between cryptography and total puzzles. And so I will tell you two types of questions that we study. The first is whether whether cryptography will be based on other total puzzles. So there are some total puzzles from which we know that we can build cryptography, but there are several other interesting total puzzles from which we don't know how to base cryptography. So what would be the use of this? Why would you do this? So it might be the case that the other puzzles have like other interesting properties which help you to build better cryptography, better efficient cryptography. And so the second question is whether there is, in the second question, we study the relationship between the various total puzzles. So as we saw in the previous slide, so some total puzzles, they have implications in, for example, economics. And if you can show that factoring, for example, it implies hardness of these other total puzzles, then we would end up showing that certain problems in economics are actually hard. So there are a lot of people spending a lot of time trying to solve these problems in economics, and I would be able to say that this is not possible. The same reason someone cannot hack into your messages. So that was it. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chethan. And now we have time for questions. So please raise your hands, your virtual hands. Thierry, I see Thierry is asking a question.
Yeah, I was clapping, but also I have a question. So for me, I'm not really into this, I don't know much about this, but how does a puzzle really help you to, basically to transmit a message? Like you have a message and you have a puzzle, and how do you use can you explain that a bit to me?
Sure. So when you transmit a message via WhatsApp, for example, it is encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, you can think of this as lock boxes. And so what we do using puzzles is we build these digital boxes. So this is not easy to explain. So you have to do like an introductory course to crypto to understand this. Yeah, I'm not sure there is an easy way to explain it.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Can I ask, continuing on this question, so assuming you have this box, how does the other side know how to open the box? I mean, you could send him the message, but then you need to also encrypt that message and you run into a cycle of encryption. So
right. So one thing one could do is, like, we assume that the two parties have met before, and therefore they share a key to the locker. Mm-hmm. So this is called symmetric crypto. So if two parties haven't met in advance, then it becomes a bit more complicated. That's where you have like public key crypto. So for this you need like puzzles which are a bit more structured.
I see. Thanks.
So yeah, the simple question is to assume the people have that the two parties have met beforehand.
Chethan,
Mm-hmm.
In your presentation, you have shown several kinds of puzzles like Sudoku and integer factorization and other games too, but can they all be reduced to some like mathematical eigenvalue problem or to some standard mathematical task?
That's a good question. So these problems have been well studied from a computational point of view. So it turns out that these are different problems. So for example, chess, which you see on your right, it's a very hard problem. It's much harder than Sudoku. So given Sudoku, you can verify a solution, right? Given a solution to Sudoku, you can verify it. So this is something called an NP problem that we call in complexity. But chess, given a solution, it's not even clear how you verify it, because you have to, like, if the position is winning for white, so you have to say that for every black move, white has a move. So it becomes like a very complicated process. So this is something which we call a p-space problem. So chess is much harder than Sudoku.
Okay.
And factoring is a bit easier than Sudoku.
Because I have always heard about integer factorization, and
Mm-hmm.
I had never idea of applying other kinds of puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
So do they really exist applications for puzzles which are more complex than factorization?
So the short answer would be we don't know how to do it. So this is like an open problem. Yeah. And there are some barriers which show that we might not be able to do this from, for example, Sudoku.
Balthasar?
Thanks, that was super interesting. My question is a bit related to Andre's point. So I'm wondering about other puzzles. So for instance, other puzzles which logical puzzles you might use. So for instance, if you have the Boolean satisfiability problem, right? So that's also NP. And my first question would be, where does this problem live between factorization and Sudoku? And second of all, if that would be, for instance, a candidate for like creating cryptography. So maybe
again, a very interesting question. So actually, Boolean satisfiability is equivalent to Sudoku. So you can reduce the one to the other. So whatever I said for Sudoku, it actually applies for Boolean satisfiability. So the problem is that we know that there are hard instances of Boolean satisfiability, but we don't know how to sample. Like, so for crypto, you need to be able to generate puzzles on the fly. We don't know how to do this exactly in a provable manner with Sudoku or Boolean satisfiability.
Nice. Can I have just a quick follow-up? So like, but factorization is also NP, no?
It's NP, but it's not NP complete. So Sudoku and satisfiability are NP complete. So these are the hardest problems where you can verify a solution.
Okay, and can you just, what's again like NP complete then as opposed to just NP? Can you?
So NP is the class of puzzles where, given a solution to the puzzle, you can verify the solution, whether the solution is correct or not. So and NP complete are the hardest problems in NP. So what does this mean? So if you can solve a puzzle which is NP complete, then you can solve any puzzle which is in NP. Okay. So if you can, so technically, if you solve Sudoku, you can solve any puzzle where, given the solution, you can verify.
Nice. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much.
I have a little question, Chethan. I don't know anything about any of this, but I thought it interesting. Obviously crypto, right? Crypto is cryptocurrencies these days. So I'm wondering whether for the layman, right? And so my question is how, like, proof of stake, proof of work, these types of elements compared to puzzles, can we conceive them as puzzles, or how are those two things related?
Yes, you can think of, so underlying, for example, Bitcoin, there is a puzzle. And so, but this puzzle has you need different properties from this puzzle. So for example, for Bitcoin, the puzzle you are using is that, what's the cleanest way? So you want a solution to the puzzle such that the solution has like, the first n entries of the solution is like 0. So it's a very different type of puzzle that we use for building Bitcoin. But you can think of these as puzzles as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
I have a question with, people are talking about quantum computing and how this is revolutionize, things like RSA, all the puzzles that we currently have. So what is the future for, if we'll ever build a real quantum computer?
So again, a very good question. So a very relevant question. So as it turns out, factoring can be broken. The factor problem I described can be broken, like if you have this stronger quantum computer. So that is one of the motivations for looking at other problems, like for example, the problem you see, Sperner. So we know that factor breaks when you have quantum computers, but we don't know whether Sperner breaks. So it would be really interesting to see if you can build crypto from Sperner, because then you would have crypto which cannot be broken by quantum computers. So we have candidate puzzles from which we know to build crypto which is quantum secure. Whether the question is whether there are other puzzles as well. Very interesting.
Any more questions? We have time. We still have about 10 minutes, and if you don't have questions for Chethan anymore, you can go back to questioning Raphael. If you just figure out you have another question, and we have time, but it's also okay to make our break longer. I think we have to be back at 11 for the continuation in the main plenary. Any more questions?
Maybe a short.
Sure.
So I mean, the notion of reducibility is super important here, right?
Yes.
And I don't know. Do you mean like polynomial reducibility, or what kind of reducibility do you have in mind? Like it has to be quite a fine-grained notion of reducibility, right?
So in cryptography, we usually talk about polynomial reducibility. But if you look at like if you go lower into the hierarchy, it makes sense to talk about small space reducibility as well. It makes sense. So there are crypto which is being built on like really lower classes, and there it would make sense to talk about other notions of reducibility.
And lower than factorization, you mean?
Yes. So people are looking into building crypto from something called NC, which is like parallel computation. We can take this offline maybe. So, but there a different notion of reducibility makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, cool. I would love to speak more about that. That's super interesting.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chethan and Rafael. It was really, really interesting. I think we all enjoyed this. We learned a lot.